Welcome back to Bombastic Nation and Ting and Ting and Ting. I'm Mr. Giant, back with some more vibe for all you. Yes, I hope you all are doing great out there. Thank you all for commenting and for liking the video and stuff like that. Thank you. Some of the comments were really informative. So, keep them coming, keep the comments coming, keep the likes coming and everything like that, okay? Now, this one here that we're going to look at is called What If the Byzantine Empire Survived? I know somewhere in history we keep asking, we keep doing the what ifs. I mean, what if Jesus Christ stayed alive? What if Napoleon had conquered the world? What if they're all over the place and thing? But hey, I ain't gonna Babylon. Let's go ahead and YouTube and simmer. See what go on here.
Scenario as a part of the Humankind What If contest, a new upcoming strategy game, and so I felt no era was more fitting for this type of game than the Eastern Romans. In 1453, the Roman Empire came to an end. What we now call the Byzantines saw themselves as that continuation of Rome that had lasted for a millennia and a half. But then it was gone. The Eastern Roman Empire had been fading in and out of relevancy for the last 300 years. So what if in an alternate timeline, the Eastern Roman Empire never collapsed? Not only simply surviving, but remaining a competent player past the 15th century. This is kind of a double whammy question. One where the Byzantine Empire survives, and the Ottomans never exist. But I'm not going to focus too much on the Ottomans for this, as that's an entire video by itself, and this video is long enough already. If I ever do talk about the Ottomans, think of that as a companion piece. If we want to imagine keeping the Byzantines in our mortal plane, we need to go back, even before the fall of 1453, centuries back to the start of the nomadic migrations by Central Asian Turks into Anatolia. Technically, we could just say Constantinople never falls in 1453 and call it a day, but look at those borders. That's no way to live. So I have to make it clear, what territory do the Byzantines still hold that are core to the empire not collapsing? Greece and Anatolia, with perhaps some territory in the Balkans for good measure. Anything post-Arab invasions, but pre-Turkic invasions. But Cody, if you want to be really thorough, why don't you just say the Arabs never invade and the Byzantines keep the Levant in North Africa? Because, Jimmy, the Arabs after their initial invasion kinda just stopped after the borders got settled. The caliphates had their own pressing matters after the Islamic invasions ended, and their presence in the region didn't threaten the Byzantines like the Seljuks did. If the Eastern Romans can settle, then so can we. When imagining a scenario where the Byzantine...
Now, you see, they're talking about... We assume that with the Arabs come Islam. I wonder back then. Let me keep watching because I'm not sure. Just had a question in my head.
First we have to ask, well, what killed it? Turks are certainly a prominent factor in the later years, but pick your poison. We got Lombards, Hungarians, Normans, Iranians. Okay, I'll cut that out. But also Slavs, Arabs, Serbs, and the two biggest factors, Crusaders and the Turks. Everyone wanted a bit of the empire, and its entire existence post-400s was a defensive war to stop that from happening. Even the Normans took over Sicily and came to try to sack Constantinople on occasion, because why not? There need to be two main factors that gotta be changed so the empire doesn't outright die. One, no Turkic migration in Anatolia. How this happens can be from multiple different changes. Perhaps Persia remains politically stable and isn't taken over by the Turks. Perhaps there is never a need to go south due to more favorable climate conditions in Central Asia. The main proponent of whether the Turks settle Anatolia is really up to whether the Turks are forced to migrate. Their movement in Anatolia was mainly because of how turbulent Central Asia had become, and this led to conflicts with the Romans. Winning one battle like Manzikert wouldn't have stopped such a large migration, and as soon as they came, eventually they would be so numerous that...
See, there's all that migration we talk about. One ethnicity is moving in and the other ethnicity is dying out or moving, or, it seems like when one group move into an area, this group that's been there either move out or they get run over pretty much. I guess that's just history repeating itself, but only scientifically, if you want to put it that way.
That the Byzantines just wouldn't hold influence in Anatolia anymore. So the situation in Central Asia would need to be better so the Turks don't need to migrate. Now I know this is flimsy and isn't the best excuse, but it's really the best chance the Byzantines would have at survival. 2. No Fourth Crusade. This is pretty much assured if point 1 didn't happen, but I'll go into that in a bit. Both were the killing blows that it couldn't come back from. Especially you, Fourth Crusade. We begin in an alternate 11th century Anatolia. The demographics of the region is a mix of Greeks in the west, Armenians in the east, and Kurds and Syrians in the south. Not much of an alternate land, as this is just Anatolia before the Seljuks. The Seljuks spread into Anatolia, kicking the Eastern Romans all the way back to Constantinople so fast that in desperation, the emperor called on the Pope in the west for aid, and in response, Pope Urban II declared a crusade to form an army that would march into Anatolia and take the land back. So, if one main facet for the Byzantines to continue to thrive is there is no Turkic migration, a side effect from this is there's never a reason for the Byzantine Emperor.
See, they call wars crusades back in the day. Put a little religious stuff in it there just to keep people going, yeah, for God. A crusade. Or maybe a crusade was just the way they described it then, and nowadays we thinking it's something spiritual, you know what I mean? Oh, like I said before, they could just try to give it a spiritual slant so the soldiers will think they're not fighting for the rich people, they're fighting for country and belief.
To call for help, and therefore the Crusades never actually happened. As much as the Crusades in the Middle East have stayed relevant in Western history, be it from old legends of knights in armor, it really isn't that relevant in global history. Yes, for a century or two there were Crusader states in the Levant, but these were undone after the Third Crusade. In many ways they didn't change that much in the Middle East, be it socially or politically, for both sides. But in Europe, they certainly did. Pope Urban II calling for a holy war set a precedent, and this had side effects. Because while we often think of the Crusades going in the Holy Land, this wasn't the only theater. The Crusades formed many orders and factions, one of which was the Teutonic Knights and Livonian Order, who after the Crusades, kind of failed, they had to go back to Europe. The last patch of paganism in Europe resided on the Baltic Sea, and a crusade was called to Christianize the region by force. The Great Northern Crusades, and the knights that had taken place in the war, carved up the region and settled.
So it was religiously motivated. Nah, not religiously motivated at all. Politically motivated there, because they send them there to Christianize them. Some people may say, regardless of the religion, if you go into somebody's place and try to make them like you, that's a form of conquering too. Because most religions are passive. But these days, people are using religions for violence mainly. There's no peace on earth, goodwill to men. There's no love thy neighbor. There's nothing like that. It's kill, bomb, bomb, bomb. That's where we are now.
Their own kingdom. The Teutonic Order by force. The Great Northern Crusades, and the knights that had taken place in the war carved up the region and settled it as their own kingdom. The Teutonic Order took root in this land and grew. So one of the effects of the Turks never entering Anatolia is the Teutonic Order is never created, booted up to Northern Europe, and doesn't create the Kingdom of Prussia. A Germany, centuries down the line, if it did want to unify, would unify under a state like Austria, or perhaps some alternate northern kingdom that was able to take the place of Prussia. But either way, Germany is not unified by a militarized state. That has a lot of ramifications, but is not important to the Byzantines at hand. While that is a big ramification, that's an entirely other scenario that isn't that important to the Byzantines. The main crusade the Byzantines care about is the Fourth. Going through the 12th and 14th centuries, there might be a chance for the Byzantines to slowly rebuild without both worrying about the Turks and worrying about their empire being split by the Latins. So it would remain not only alive, but a decisive competitor in not just the East, but the European world, alongside their rivals, the Holy Roman Empire and the Catholic world. It's often overlooked considering it's been 500 years, but while it was still alive, the Byzantines were rarely friendly to the Latin West, and vice versa. During the times of Justinian, they had tried to retake Italy.
So even back then they had East and West. We've been dividing up ourselves like crazy for years, haven't we? Everybody wants a piece of land for their people. Then when they get the land and they get a little strong, they want a piece of somebody else's land because they have natural resources there and stuff like that.
Italy from the Lombards and other tribes, only for it to end in failure. And the crown of the Roman emperor had been given to the Franks by the Pope, which was a slap in the face to a state that was still Roman. The continued resentment only grew over the centuries. When the Great Schism occurred, this chasm only became wider. Eventually, Greeks would purge Latins in the street of Constantinople, or Latins would force conversions of Orthodox churches in southern Italy. It was even so bad when the Fourth Crusade burned Constantinople to the ground, the church was horrified. But if you ask the average person, they would say the Greeks deserved it. This alternate Europe sees the tensions that were growing between the Catholic West and Orthodox.
If you ask the average people, they say the Greek deserve it. It depends on what aspect of society the average people you question come from. Because if you take in consideration the way things are today, where you have a few million people believe in one thing, and then another side believe in, or equal numbers believe in opposite. Back then, did they have like press or newspaper or some kind of media that would give out the information, and were those media representatives biased like they are these days for either side of an equation? I'm assuming the people there would feel kind of the same we do, because we don't have, ordinary human beings don't really have an original thought per se. Everything is given to us pretty much. How to feel, what to eat, where's the best place to go is pretty much told to us, you know what I mean? We don't usually go find out stuff for ourselves. We just live in our little bubble. And I'm rambling, but you know, they keep saying that's what the people thought at the time, but we really don't know, because then there might be an equal amount of people who disagree with it. You know what I'm saying?
Orthodox East before the Ottomans manifest into various conflicts and competition, not unlike what the Protestants and Catholics had, transcending not just theology, but into secular politics and land grabs, as the Byzantines can actually enforce their claims, especially in Italy. Whether or not they would succeed to reclaim any of this land, perhaps southern Italy, I don't really know. This would be a running theme, as the Western Latins proclaim they're the rightful heirs of Rome, and the Byzantines encroach at any opportunity to take back a land that they saw as rightfully theirs. Moving forward a few hundred years with the Mongols gone, the empire would soon find itself not alone in this competition with the West, because now we have the Russians. That historical fear in the West of the Russian horde morphs over the centuries as not just anti-Russian sentiment, but anti-Eastern, mostly between the Holy Roman Empire, Austria, Hungary, and occasionally Russia or Poland joining in. Just as the Ottomans taking Vienna was a terrifying prospect for the Austrians, this doesn't change much just because it's the Byzantines. Say we continue on past the 15th century, and the struggle between the East and West has dominated European politics. Then suddenly, a monk in Germany nails a piece of paper to a door. Or someone else considering how much of butterfly effect the Teutonic Order not existing and Byzantines continuing would have on this timeline. I can't imagine the Reformation would go detail for detail like in our timeline, more the general strokes. Many by this time did have problems with the church, and the inevitable invention of the printing press would spread local languages of the Bible. So Protestants, or at least Christians in the north, would rebel in the same form. The ramifications of this, however, would make the complexities and cluster truck that was the Reformation and 30 Years' War even more of a mess, as now we also have an Orthodox state, technically two of them, already rivals to Latin Europe, taking advantage of the situation the church found themselves in. Europe during the Renaissance and Reformation is a wacky three-way battle between Protestants, Catholics, and Orthodox. I'd say it'd be less of a three-way battle and more everyone just teams up against the Catholics. Byzantines using this opportunity to move in on Austria, and considering this is a timeline without Prussia-Brandenburg, who knows who unites Germany? It's all up in the air. The Ottomans were considered the sick man of Europe in the last 200 years of their life. And it wasn't really because of some major battle, it was because Europe, at least the West, just became far more wealthy. The ancient Silk Road routes across Asia were no longer needed. The Mediterranean, which was once the entire world, became just a small lake in the middle of a vast ocean. And slowly that prestige of their geographic position fell away, as nations naturally bordering the ocean flourished, exploiting the New World in Asia. The Byzantines, despite existing since the time of Rome, would find themselves in the exact same position, became immediately devalued because of this, the caravel. It's true the Ottomans did block Europeans, except Venice, out of trade with China when they took power, encouraging the Iberian states to look for new routes to Asia. But this wasn't the only factor. The Iberian kingdoms, with the invention of the caravel, for the first time could navigate deep into the Atlantic Ocean. While the Ottomans did help with that little push, it's likely had the Byzantines still been around, the Portuguese would have gone down the African coast anyway, creating their own forts down the continent on their way to India, before one day being accidentally blown off course, landing on a continent that nobody knew existed. It may not be 1492 with Columbus finding the ocean blue, but news of another landmass across the sea has pretty much the same results that we saw in our timeline. The Spanish jump on board, then the British, Dutch, you get the point. The Byzantine prestige, whatever it had left, would dwindle down eventually, be it colonization and the riches that it brings to its competitors, or the rise of nationalism that may strike in the following centuries. The state relied heavily on foreign mercenaries, and most decisions were top-down from the emperor. In a growingly complex world, this mentality would have to change, or the empire couldn't survive. The Byzantines, ironically, by a time of mercantilism and colonization, would be the sick man of Europe.
See, and that's the thing. You see, in history, like he's saying there, if you try to strong arm, people are going to fight back, and unfortunately, we see superpowers today, they think that's the way to go. Just fight them. We got all the firepower, we could subdue them, and that's what a lot of ordinary people are saying, without understanding the complexities of international affairs and thing, you know what I mean? Just bomb them, just blow them up, wipe them off the face of the earth. So in essence, it's the same sort of mentality that they're talking about here. If the Byzantines used that mentality, they probably wouldn't succeed.
And may be seen as an outdated relic of a bygone era. They might have to eventually reinvent themselves, and even if it wasn't as drastic as Turkey or China did, all empires do eventually come to an end. Whenever a nation or empire collapses far back in history, we often imagine that had it continued on, it would have remained the same type of entity that it was. The Eastern Romans were remarkable in more or less keeping the same tradition alive for 1,000 years. But compared to a world after Columbus, they would have to change. They would never reunite Rome, but they at least culturally would continue the tradition into the 16th and maybe 19th centuries, until it's eventually reorganized as Greece, even if it's not by name. This is very much one of those butterfly type scenarios. Without Prussia, the dynamic of Eastern Europe is entirely shifted. The Baltics may become Orthodox instead of Catholic, or maybe Poland without the Prussians is able to become a superpower in its own right. Entirely alternate conflicts spawn houses and states that transform Europe in ways none of us can even predict, as they're based in history that simply never happened because the Roman Empire held firm. This is Cody of Alternate History Hub.
Wow, that was interesting. Makes you want to think now about all those empires and all those empires like in China and India and all those places. If those people, if their ideology was still prevalent today, how would it be? Now, in India, there's that peaceful leader there. I take him, the one that converted. I can't remember his name, but he converted to Buddha, and he's a peaceful guy. I'll take him over what we have today, if we're going to be living in peace. But anyway, man, thank you all for listening. I'm going to leave a link in the description to this video. Go check it out. Check out the channel. See what they have going on and thing. Show them some love. All right. In the meantime, take care of each other. All right.